Welcome to this month's Schuman Talk. This is a very special Schuman Talk because today, exactly 75 years ago, Robert Schuman gave a 3-minute talk, which was the starting point of European unification. In fact, we are gathering together in Warsaw, and tonight we are holding a commemoration of this event in the Holy Trinity Lutheran Church, a beautiful big church. And it's almost exactly to the hour 75 years since Robert Schuman gave this 3-minute speech in which he laid the foundation for the European house where today 450 million Europeans live together in peace. Now, I consider this to be the defining moment of post-war Europe because it launched the European movement for peace and unity that has led to today's European Union. And the Schuman Declaration of May the 9th embodied the values and virtues of peace, brotherhood, equality, freedom, collaboration, interdependence, mutual accountability, and seeking the common good of all. And these are the values and the virtues which are under pressure today from nationalism and populism within and without Europe today. These are the values that we must urgently embrace again in these turbulent times. And so this is an important moment for us to reflect what happened exactly 75 years ago in Paris. Now, the newspapers, May the 10th, 1950, reported on what had taken place in a press conference here in Quai d'Orsay, that was the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France, where the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Robert Schuman, made this surprise announcement. You can see here the headline, France takes the nations by surprise. Phrases like a sensational decision, Schuman bomb, indicated how much of a surprise this was to the whole world that this plan was being presented that was going to treat Germany and France as equals, the vanquished and the victor together. Never before in history had that uh, had the defeated party been treated as an equal. And we're going to explore what was behind this whole gesture from the part of France to reach out to Germany and treat the Germans as equal. Now, you see, there was a plan. This moment was the moment where a plan was presented to the world, and it was an unexpected plan. In fact, Robert Schuman hadn't really told his own prime minister what he was going to do. And it caught him by surprise as well. He wanted to make sure this was going to go through. Now, we can think, well, didn't peace begin with the end of World War II? No, the guns were silent, but real peace had not yet been established in a Europe that was still suffering a severe case of post-trauma stress disorder. Scattered families, bombed cities, disrupted lives, broken futures. All of these were insurmountable obstacles that seemed to true peace. Perhaps you've seen pictures, or you've actually been to Rotterdam. You've seen the Zadkine statue there of an anguished figure with hands thrust in the air, revealing a gaping hole in his torso. This is the image not only of a destroyed city through Hitler's blitzkrieg, but it could also represent all cities across Europe and indeed the whole continent. And so, what was it in Robert Schuman's 3-minute speech that gave it such power, that made it such a defining moment, a turning moment, the beginning of real peace in Europe? 3 minutes. Can you even boil an egg or make a cup of coffee in 3 minutes? Now, read on one level, this plan was a bold and simple one to bind former enemies, particularly France and Germany, so closely together economically that it would become not merely, that war would become not merely unthinkable, but actually materially impossible. You see, coal and steel were needed to create a war machine. It was a project for peace and inclusion through cooperation, not domination and exclusion, which actually marked the Treaty of Versailles and certain plans for peace today. Yet Schuman's project was not merely political or economic. He warned that the project must not just be economic and technological, it needed a soul. You see, when we read on a deeper level, the Schuman Declaration reveals the project to be deeply moral, even spiritual, rooted in values of the heart. Now, when we look at that document we just saw, we see words I've picked out there and highlighted um, that show the values that were behind what this that behind this declaration. Now, Schuman doesn't use the word Christian, doesn't use religious jargon at all. But when we read these words, we are seeing the values there that are actually rooted in a Christian understanding. You see the words peace, coming together, participation, pooling, common, solidarity, all. You see, it's inclusive. Goes on to talk about unification, equal, community. And so the core values of the Schuman Declaration were peace through cooperation, not domination, solidarity among the nations rather than competition, supranational, above the national level, supranational governance as a new form of international order, limiting aggressive nationalism, and democracy and rule of law as cornerstones for building trust between states. Democracy, Schuman wrote, owed its existence to Christianity, emphasizing human dignity, the freedom of each individual, human rights, and the practice of brotherly love. And that human rights was rooted in an understanding that every human was created in the image of God. Democracy, he warned, had to be Christian or it would not be. It would degenerate into anarchy or tyranny. Now, this is a process we see unfolding before our very eyes right now in numerous places. Real peace, Schuman believed, was not the absence of war, but the active construction of relationships founded on justice and solidarity. There will not be real peace between Russia and Ukraine without justice and reconciliation in the long run. After two world wars, the task of rebuilding Europe required not only new institutions, but a moral renewal, a reawakening of conscience, a rediscovering of human brotherhood. Schuman wrote, European unity must be rooted in freedom, equality, and solidarity. Now, you'll recognize these words liberté, égalité, fraternité. That's the French national motto. And he says, we have drawn these from Christian teachings. These were not just inventions of the Enlightenment, but grew out of a deeper spiritual reality, Schuman says. So, what were the sources of Schumann's personal spirituality? Now, the fathers of this European project are often quoted as being Schuman, Monet, Adenauer, and de Gasperi. We have a photo, a statue of these four men. This is in the little town of Seychelles, where Schuman lived, where his house was, and where he has been buried. And just across the road from his house is this monument there to these four men. They were all Catholics. Now, three of them were very devout Catholics, that is de Gasperi, Schuman, and Adenauer, and they lived daily in a prayerful lifestyle, trying to live out the values of Catholic social teaching. And from their youth, each one of them, this is de Gasperi, Alcide de Gasperi, the Italian prime minister, and Konrad Adenauer, who is the first chancellor of Western Germany, as well as Schuman. Monet was often behind the scenes. He was not the statesman the others were as premiers, but he was a very clever man, coming up with lots of good ideas to make things happen. He was a much more nominal Catholic than the others, but nevertheless, they were all strongly influenced by Catholic social teaching, which built on the concept of imago Dei. That is, every human being has been created in the Creator's image. And therefore, the Catholic Church was championing the solidarity of the whole human race. Thus, the concept of seeking the common good of all. not just seeking to make our nation great. It's interesting to remember that the Polish trade union Solidarity, or Solidarność, led by Lech Walesa, was strongly influenced by this Catholic social thinking, and that name is not a coincidence. Now, that was one of the main sources of influence on Schumann's spirituality. Another one was a movement known as moral rearmament, led by a Lutheran evangelist, Frank Buchmann. And we have a photo of him together with Schumann. On the left there, this is Schumann and Buchmann meeting. When Schumann first heard about this movement, he said, I want to meet this man. And they engaged in conversation together. And Schumann realized, well, here was a spirituality that was extremely practical because Buchmann stressed the centrality of forgiveness and reconciliation for true peace, not just between nations, but between, say, mine owners and the labor union leaders, for example. And this is where he first began hearing about this movement. He was on a train trip while he was prime minister in 1948, and that's where he met a businessman who was just returning from a conference with Buchmann and amazed at the reconciliation that had taken place between mine owners and the minor union leaders. And he said, I need to hear more about this. And so he met up with Frank Buchmann. Um, Now, he also learned later that Konrad Adenauer was very strongly influenced by this same movement. Although Adenauer was Catholic, this movement was very ecumenical. And Adenauer himself was one of the first Germans allowed out of West Germany after the war to attend conferences in Switzerland run by this moral rearmament, or MRA movement, in this Center for the Reconciliation of the Nations, up in a mountain village high above Montreux at the eastern end of Lake Geneva. Forgiveness between nations, the dignity of the human person, the primacy of the common good over selfish national interests were the foundational principles fleshed out in these gatherings, which spread a spirit of forgiveness and reconciliation across Western Europe. These were the principles that became the foundation for the new international order that emerged in this post-war era of the late 40s and the early 50s. United Nations, the Council of Europe, the European Coal and Steel Community, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and so on. This cooperation, working together. And so for Schuman, Europe was not just a peace project for Europeans. He said, we are called to accomplish a spiritual and cultural mission. Europe itself is only the beginning of a world organization based on freedom, equality, and solidarity. Here you have liberté, égalité, and fraternité again, which we have drawn from Christian teachings, he says. Yet he didn't see Europe as being a Christian club, but he insisted that its humanist, democratic culture was impossible without Christian roots. He didn't use Christian jargon in the Schuman Declaration or in his talks, but his values were deeply rooted in his understanding of who God was and who Jesus Christ was and who human beings were created in God's image. And so, in these 3 short minutes, Schuman spoke of a united, collaborative Europe being able to fulfill her responsibilities to the rest of the world, particularly Africa. So he was not being Eurocentric as he was proposing this whole plan. Neither was the European Union ever set up to, in the words of President Trump, screw America. It was actually an initiative from the American Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, who told Schuman to come with a plan for how to bring Germany back into the civilized circle of nations before they were going to meet on on May the 10th. This is why Schuman announced this on May the 9th, and Dean Acheson was in on the plan, even when the French Prime Minister was not. So it was very much with the strong support of the American Secretary of State at that time. So, the relevance and the significance of the Schuman Declaration 75 years later is clear. As the international order faces fresh threats from authoritarianism, from polarization and nationalism, Schumann's message takes on new urgency. Populists and autocrats seek to tear down supranational cooperation, appealing to fear and resentment. But Schumann's values, the rule of law, democratic governance, respect for human dignity and human rights, cross border solidarity, they all point the way forward for us today. The institutions that he helped to inspire, imperfect as they are defenses against a return to the politics of domination and exclusion, of fear and hatred, based on a philosophy of might is right. So, May the 9th, 1950, was a moment of grace that enabled another moment of grace 40 years later as communism collapsed and the hated Berlin Wall came down. It was only because of the positive things that had happened in Western Europe that eventually the peoples of Eastern Europe clamored for change. And in 1989, we were all very euphoric and excited at what was going on. But then I would say there was a third moment of grace, and that was in February 2022. This was when the Russian army was invading Ukraine and expected to take over the whole nation just within a few days. But this man we see in the pictures, Zelensky, and his cabinet said, no, we're not going anywhere. And this was a video or a picture taken where he broadcast to Ukraine and the rest of the world, no, I'm staying here and we're going to stop. We're going to fight. We're going to resist. And so Ukrainians have stood against their imperialistic aggressor. They've dared to believe that truth prevails, that there are things worth living for and dying for. The Ukrainians have shamed the rest of us in Europe by reminding us of these values of freedom, equality, solidarity, which we so easily give lip service to and take for granted, but for which they are giving their lives. Short memories breed short sightedness. May our memories, our consciences, our imaginations for a future, peaceful, united, and inclusive Europe, be stirred afresh as we reflect on the urgent significance of the Schuman Declaration today, Europe Day 2025, 75 years exactly after that momentous 3-minute speech from Robert Schuman, the father of Europe. Thank you very much.